Picture this. You're a kid, or maybe a teenager, or honestly, even an adult just starting out at a new company.
Right.
You look at a rule, or maybe a specific way something is being done, and it makes absolutely zero sense to you. Like, you can clearly see the inefficiency. You can see the flaw.
Oh, yeah. The classic, why are we doing this moment?
Exactly. So you raise your hand, and you ask the most natural question in the world. You ask, why? And what do you get in response?
Usually not a good answer.
No. You don't get a breakdown of the logic. You definitely don't get a flow chart explaining the rationale. You get a sigh, a shrug, and that universally frustrating sentence, because we've always done it that way.
Or the equally dismissive, look, that's just how things are.
Yes. It's the ultimate conversation ender. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It just shuts down the debate entirely.
It really does.
You're expected to just accept that because a rule or a norm or a tradition has survived the test of time, it must automatically be correct. But if you're anything like me, a tiny, annoying voice in the back of your head immediately goes, wait, is it though?
Yeah, it creates this profound feeling of cognitive dissonance. Because, part of you wants to just nod and go along with it because arguing is exhausting.
It's so exhausting.
But another part of you realizes that time itself is not actually a form of evidence. Just because something is old doesn't mean it's optimal. And that realization is exactly what we're exploring today.
We're looking at a really fascinating essay today titled Von Bundukdan, which basically takes a magnifying glass to the psychology, the sociology, and the deep philosophy behind why humanity just blindly trusts tradition.
And just to be clear, the mission for this deep dive isn't just to, complain about annoying rules at the office or rigid family traditions.
Right, it's way bigger than that.
Exactly. We're going to map out the invisible structures that actually govern the choices you make every single day. The goal here is to figure out how to reclaim the freedom to actually think for yourself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does that phrase, "it's been around a long time," work so incredibly well to just shut off our brains?
Well, to understand that, we really have to look inward first, right down to a biological level. We have to look at the sheer evolutionary laziness of human psychology.
Laziness.
Yeah. The author of the essay uses this brilliant analogy of an old chair. So imagine you walk into a room and there's a very old, very worn wooden chair.
Okay.
You have no idea what kind of wood it is. You don't know who built it. You definitely haven't inspected the joints or the nails. But you've seen people sit in it. Maybe you've sat in it 100 times before and it hasn't collapsed. So you trust it.
You just plop right down. You aren't running a stress test on the legs.
Exactly. You trust it, not because you have empirical proof of its structural integrity right in this moment, but simply because you're used to it. And this brings up a fundamental cognitive mechanism called a heuristic.
A heuristic, right. The brain's shortcut.
Right. Our brains are incredibly energy-hungry organs. They consume about 20% of our body's daily caloric intake, and they absolutely hate starting from zero.
They want to conserve fuel.
Yes. Analyzing every single choice, every single belief from the ground up, it takes a massive amount of caloric and cognitive energy. So the brain uses shortcuts to conserve fuel. And the appeal to tradition is one of the most powerful shortcuts we have.
If it's been around a long time, the brain just assumes it's safe.
Yep, it must be safe enough.
Wait, let me push back on this a little bit, because sometimes the old way is actually the best way, right?
True.
The text brings up the idea of an old bridge. If a bridge has been standing over a river for 50 years and hasn't collapsed, that survival over time actually is proof of its quality. The engineers did a good job.
That's true.
Or, think about a grandma's recipe that's been passed down for 5 generations. It didn't survive because people were lazy. It survived because it tastes amazing.
Yeah.
Isn't survival over time actual literal proof of value?
That is a very fair point, and the essay completely validates that line of thinking. In the realm of physics, engineering, or even cooking, time is a fantastic filter.
Right.
The old bridge is likely structurally sound. But here's the crucial distinction, and this is where the shortcut becomes a trap. The danger arises when the brain takes that exact same heuristic, the one that works for the physical bridge, and applies it to abstract things.
Oh, I see.
It applies to beliefs, to values, to complex societal norms.
I think I see where you're going with this. A belief isn't made of steel and concrete.
Precisely. The mechanics of a bridge don't change, but society does. Think about the belief that the Earth was the center of the universe.
Oh.
That wasn't just some fringe idea. That was the absolute, unquestionable truth for centuries. It was taught in universities, defended by the most powerful religious institutions, and accepted by almost every human alive. It had centuries of time behind it.
But that massive amount of time didn't make it true.
Exactly.
It just meant they hadn't invented good enough telescopes yet. It just meant the belief hadn't been actively disproven by the general public.
Right. The novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote extensively about this psychological quirk. He pointed out that people cling to familiar things, not because those things are inherently true, but because they offer stability.
Stability, that makes sense.
The human animal doesn't primarily want the truth. It wants the feeling of safety. And an old belief, an old societal rule, provides a massive amount of psychological safety. It saves us from the terrifying prospect of not knowing how the world works.
It sounds like society is running on a massive set of default software settings.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, you know when you get a new smartphone and the screen brightness is set to a certain level and the notifications behave a certain way? Most people never go into the settings menu to change them.
They just leave it on default.
Right, they just use the phone exactly as it came out of the box. It feels like society operates the exact same way. You don't even know the settings are there until you actively try to change one.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it transitions us perfectly from the individual brain to the entire architecture of society.
Okay.
Because this individual psychological flaw, this desire for the lazy, energy-saving shortcut, it scales up. It infects entire institutions. This is the primary mechanism by which a society maintains itself. Think about how children learn what is normal.
They aren't reading philosophy books.
Right. They aren't handed a textbook on logic or ethics when they are toddlers. They learn through pure social conditioning and repetition.
Right. It's not like someone sits a 5-year-old down and explains the historical reasoning behind gender roles. They just hear, boys don't cry or girls should be quiet and polite, repeated over and over. It becomes the invisible air they breathe.
And it goes way deeper than just spoken phrases. The sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called this concept social reproduction.
Social reproduction.
Yeah. The idea is that society doesn't primarily replicate itself through strict laws or the threat of violence. It replicates itself through subtle habits and environmental design.
Like the default life path.
Exactly. Let's look at the default life path the text mentions. You go to school, you get a job, you settle down, you buy a house.
Which is a path so ingrained, if you deviate from it, people literally assume something is wrong with you.
Yes. But think about how that path is enforced. How did you learn what a normal workday looked like? By going to school.
Oh, wow.
A bell rings, you sit down. Another bell rings, you're allowed to eat. You literally have to raise your hand to ask an authority figure for permission to use the bathroom.
That is crazy to think about.
By the time you're 18, the concept of a rigid, externally controlled schedule isn't an idea you debate. It's a biological rhythm. The system trains you to desire the very things that keep the system running.
Okay, let's bring this into the adult world because the essay gives a great workplace example.
Yes, the workflow example.
Right. Let's say you're at a company and there's a workflow that has been used for 10 years. It's incredibly slow, it's inefficient. Maybe it involves manually entering data that could easily be automated today.
We've all been there.
We have. So if you raise your hand in a meeting and say, hey, why don't we use this new software? It's faster and cheaper. You usually aren't met with a logical debate about software efficiency.
No, you were met with immediate friction.
You're labeled difficult or like not a team player. You become a threat to the culture.
Which highlights a brilliant observation from philosopher Michel Foucault about how power operates.
Foucault, okay.
We tend to think of power as armies or police forces. But Foucault argued that true power is much more subtle. It's the ability to define what is normal and what is abnormal.
Ah.
If the system defines the 10-year-old manual data entry workflow as normal, then your entirely logical suggestion to automate it is, by definition, abnormal.
Wow. So the system protects itself by making the person asking the question look like the crazy one.
Exactly.
It's almost like the organization has an immune response to the word why. It attacks the question to protect the host.
It absolutely does. And there are massive economic incentives for this immune response, which thinkers like Karl Marx pointed out.
Right.
Economic and social systems tend to fiercely protect themselves simply because they are currently functioning. Even if they're deeply flawed, even if they exploit the people within them, they are working right now. The gears are turning.
And changing them is dangerous?
Yes. To change them is to introduce imbalance and risk to the people at the top. So the system incentivizes everyone to just keep their heads down, do the manual data entry, and trust the old chair.
Okay, so if society is just this giant network of arbitrary default settings protected by an immune system that actively attacks anyone who asks questions what actually happens to a person the exact moment they realize this.
It's a heavy moment.
Like you're sitting in a pointless 2-hour Zoom meeting and it suddenly hits you that none of this actually matters. The chair you've been sitting in your whole life is made of paper.
What's fascinating here is that this is the moment we move from sociology straight into a profound existential crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre had a great term for this state of unawareness. He called it living in bad faith.
Bad faith.
Yeah. Bad faith is when you play a character like the good employee or the obedient child, and you convince yourself that you literally have no other choice.
You're just following the script.
Right. You live within pre-existing structures, playing the roles society handed you, and pretending that those roles are a law of nature. You lie to yourself because the alternative is too terrifying.
Because when you start asking why, that illusion shatters. The text describes this as an existential drop.
Yes.
It's not so much a cartoon Wile E. Coyote running off a cliff. It's more like working at a company where you accidentally get access to the financial books.
Oh, that's a terrifying thought.
Right. And you look at the math and you realize, wait a minute, we are totally bankrupt. There is no money. But you look out of your office and everyone is still showing up at 9 a.m. They're still brewing the break room coffee. They're still having intense meetings about Q4 projections.
And nobody wants to acknowledge the math because acknowledging it means the whole reality collapses.
Exactly. The second you ask why, you acknowledge the math. You lose your footing. The boundary between what you thought was right and wrong or important and pointless suddenly blurs.
It's disorienting.
It's not this triumphant moment of liberation. It's terrifying. You realize you're standing on absolutely nothing. Doesn't that just lead to total paralysis?
It is deeply paralyzing. Albert Camus explored this confrontation, calling it the absurd.
The absurd.
Yeah, it's the horrifying realization that the universe does not have the built-in objective order that we desperately crave. We want the rules to be real. We want our traditions to be objectively true. But they aren't.
They're just made up.
They are just things humans made up a long time ago. And going back to that idea of psychological safety, this is why people fight so hard against change. Quotes from Dostoevsky come to mind again. They don't actually fear the truth itself. They fear losing the frame they use to understand the world.
Because without the frame, everything is just chaos. If the old way of doing things isn't guaranteed to be right, then how do I know anything is right?
Exactly.
If I reject the default path of school, job, mortgage, what on earth am I supposed to do instead?
That is the ultimate burden. If you realize the traditions you grew up with are arbitrary, you suddenly have to make your own choices. And as Friedrich Nietzsche pointed out, destroying old values is only half the battle. If you smash the old tablets of law, you don't get to just float in the void. You now carry the incredibly heavy burden of having to create new values. You have to write your own script.
And there's no instruction manual for that.
None at all. Nobody is going to grade your paper and tell you that you chose the right new values. You are entirely on your own.
That is exhausting just to think about. I completely understand why someone would just want to go back to the default settings. It's so much easier to just say, well, my parents did it this way, so I'm doing it this way. Of course it is.
Because the alternative is carrying the weight of the entire world on your shoulders every time you make a decision.
It is exhausting. But the core argument of these philosophers is that going back to sleep, willfully ignoring the math, and going back to bad faith is a betrayal of your own humanity.
Wow.
You're surrendering your freedom for the sake of comfort. You're choosing to be an object rather than a person.
So what does this all mean? How do we practically apply this? Let's bring this down to daily life.
We can't blindly trust the old ways, but questioning every single thing leaves us in a terrifying, paralyzed void where we have to invent the universe from scratch every morning. How are we actually supposed to navigate a Tuesday?
This is where the text brings in a very grounding, practical strategy from Stoicism. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus had a very clear directive: separate what you can control from what you cannot control.
Okay, the classic Stoic advice.
Right. You cannot control the fact that a massive, centuries-old tradition exists. You can't control what your family expects of you or what society deems normal. Trying to fight the existence of those structures will just burn you out.
Yeah.
But you have absolute control over whether you, internally, accept them.
You control your own consent to the tradition.
Yes. Another Stoic thinker, Seneca, observed that people follow the crowd not because they genuinely believe the crowd is correct, but out of a deep psychological fear of standing alone.
That fear of isolation.
Exactly. A wise person recognizes this fear. They don't blindly follow tradition. But crucially, they don't blindly oppose it either.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Because the goal isn't to just be a contrarian for the sake of being annoying.
Right. Nobody likes that.
You don't just automatically do the exact opposite of what tradition says. Because if you do that, you're still being controlled by the tradition. You're just reacting to it negatively. Your compass is still set by the thing you're fighting.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The text offers a critical reversal of how we usually think about this. The default setting we are raised with is, things are right because they are old. The enlightened setting is, things are old because they sometimes work.
Sometimes work.
Yes. Your job isn't to look at the age of a belief to determine its value. Your job is to ask, is it logical for me right now in this specific context?
I love the examples the text gives for this. Take the traditional belief that you need a stable corporate job to be a responsible adult. For a long time, that worked. It provided security, a pension, a clear path.
It made sense for the era.
But today, the economy is entirely different. Maybe a freelance career, or being a content creator, or starting a small online business is actually more logical for your specific skills.
Exactly.
If you blindly follow the tradition, you might trap yourself in a cubicle for 40 years waiting for a gold watch that isn't coming. But if you blindly oppose it, you might turn down a genuinely great stable job just to prove you're rebellious.
It requires active, conscious evaluation of the mechanics of your own life.
Yeah.
The text also mentions the traditional belief of suppressing emotions, the classic stiff upper lip mentality.
Oh, that's a big one.
In a survival situation 100 years ago, maybe that stoic suppression was necessary for a family to get through a harsh winter. But applying that unquestioned tradition to your marriage today,
That's a recipe for disaster.
it is. That risks total disconnection from yourself and your partner. You have to evaluate the tool for the job you are currently doing.
Okay, so the analogy I'm getting here is the goal isn't to be an arsonist.
And ours,
Yeah, you don't want to just walk in and burn down the entire house of society just because it's old and you suddenly realize humans built it.
no, because then you're just standing in the rain.
Right. The goal is to be a home inspector.
I like
You
that.
walk through this old house of society and you bring your flashlight and your clipboard. You look at the load-bearing walls, maybe things like basic human decency, the value of community, or the importance of a shared meal. And you say, okay, this wall still works. It keeps the roof up. We keep this.
Right.
But then you look at the outdated plumbing, the rigid gender roles, the toxic work culture, the expectation to sacrifice your mental health for a corporation, and you rip that out.
You renovate.
Exactly. You keep what works, you discard what doesn't, but you do it on purpose.
On purpose. That is the absolute key to this entire deep dive. You are no longer acting on autopilot. You are actively choosing your values. You aren't rejecting tradition, you are auditing it.
And that really brings us back to you, the listener. We all crave certainty. We all want the world to be simple and the rules to be clear. But, as Sartre said, we are condemned to be free.
Condemned to be free.
You don't have to reject every single habit, value, or tradition you were raised with. In fact, you probably keep a lot of them. But moving forward, you must keep them because you actually understand them.
Because you've examined them.
Because you've inspected the foundation, looked at the map, and found it solid. Not just because they've always been there. You have to take on the heavy burden of consciously choosing your own values, just like Nietzsche described.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of your daily life, it raises a rather provocative question about the people around you.
Oh.
The text ends by asking a very pointed question. Are you living your own choice, or are you just continuing someone else's life?
Wow.
If you realize you've been living according to someone else's script, and you finally decide to change your lines, what happens to the rest of the cast?
They probably won't like it.
They won't. The systems, the workplace, and even the family members around you rely on you playing your part to maintain their illusion of certainty. By simply reclaiming your freedom and asking why, you might just become the catalyst that forces the people you care about into their own existential freefall.
That is heavy.
The question is, are you prepared to be the one who breaks their frame?
Oof. That is a heavy but incredibly necessary thought to chew on. Next time you're told to do something, because we've always done it that way, take a second. Look at that old chair before you sit down.
Ask why.
Ask why. Look at the company's financial books. It might be scary to acknowledge the math, but it is the only way to actually reclaim your own mind. Thanks for exploring this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the defaults, keep inspecting the house, and we'll catch you next time.